this meeting of the Randwick Local Planning Panel, time being 1 minute after 1 p.m. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands we occupy for this meeting, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. The meeting today is to consider the determination of one developer application. Panel members for this matter are myself, Lindsay Fletcher, as the panel chair, Peter Romy and Heather Wharton as the independent expert members, and the community member is Peter Ryan. This meeting is being held by public video conference due to the COVID-19 precautions. As the panel chair, I request that you be considerate and respectful of each other and remain on mute until I ask you to speak. I also request that you don't interject while another person is speaking. The panel operates in terms of a code of conduct and operating guidelines, which have been modified to facilitate the effective functioning of the panel during this period. The details are available on the Council's website. This public meeting will be recorded and will be placed on the Council's website following the meeting. If that is of concern to you on privacy grounds, then I suggest you take it into consideration in your decision to make a public statement before the panel today. In terms of the code, general declarations of interest have been provided before the meeting by all panel members, as well as a specific declaration of interest in relation to the matters being considered today. I can confirm that all declarations have been received and no members of the panel have declared a conflict of interest on the item under consideration and determination at this meeting. The signed declarations will be available to view through the Council's website by tomorrow afternoon. I also wish to advise that all members of the public addressing the panel today must declare, prior to commencing their address, any political contributions or donations exceeding $1,000 made over the past 2 years to any political party or candidate who contested the last ordinary election of council. Our usual practice is to allow each speaker 3 minutes to present, including speakers representing community groups, individuals and the applicant. If you have registered to speak, your address to the panel will be recorded. You'll be given a warning 30 seconds before your time limit, and I have a limited discretion to allow extra time if appropriate. We will hear first from councillors, followed by members of the public, and then from the applicant in this matter. The panel has had an opportunity to inspect the site and locality and been provided with a copy of all the submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the application. Therefore, there is no need for speakers to repeat the points made in those submissions. I ask that each speaker be heard in silence while they're addressing the panel and that courtesy and respect be observed throughout this meeting. There's to be no personal criticism directed at any speaker or the council staff. Any such criticism would be contrary to the panel's code of conduct and will not be accepted. Panel members may ask questions of the speakers to clarify understanding of the points they are making. After hearing from all speakers, the panel will adjourn to debate the matter and make its determination. If more information is required by the panel, the decision may be deferred, either for a further public meeting or to be dealt with electronically. The panel decision and recording will be made available on the Council's website as soon as possible, usually by the following day. There is to be no recording of this meeting other than the official recording. The only item on today's public agenda is the development application for 39 Arcadia Street, Coogee. The assessment report recommends that the panel conditionally approve the application. We have 4 people registered to address the panel on this item. So I'll move straight to the first of those, and that is Councillor Kathy Nielsen. Councillor Nielsen, can you please address the panel?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. As you will have read, 39 Arcadia Street, Coogee is a very interesting site for many reasons. Notwithstanding the many skillful amendments that have been made, I would like to use a couple of visuals to highlight how the height variation actually does impact negatively on the Heritage House, Bellarmic, and also on Dunningham Reserve. So if you look at that figure there, that is what is proposed. And if you just slide down the picture, down the page, you will see what it would look like if the 12-metre height limit was imposed. And I would suggest that that would be a more respectful relationship to the Heritage House if it were the restricted height limit. So the next slide, please. So that shows the northern elevation in relation again to the house. And that's currently what is being proposed. Now that is what it would look like if it was the 12-metre height. And again, I would, my position would be that that would be a much more sympathetic relationship between the Heritage House and the new flat building. Then the next slide, please. So this one is viewed from Dunningham Reserve, and that's what is proposed as of now. And the next slide shows what would be proposed if in fact, so that should be, sorry, slide 4. Slide 4 shows what the same scene would look like if in fact it was the 12-metre height limit. And I apologise for my my artistic talents and architectural talents, but it's holiday mode. But my main reason for showing you these images in a visual form was to highlight, I think, the actual vision that you get. And I would respectfully argue that Dunningham Reserve, the building facing as it faces east, is a very important facade. And so I would, and I've heard others, support the fact that if it were the 12-metre height, it would be a much more sympathetic way of addressing the building to the foreshore, notwithstanding, of course, it's got that dreadful, well, I shouldn't say dreadful, but it's got the difficulty of being beside a very tall building, which does not very sympathetically address Coogee Beach. So I guess, Chair, I would respectfully suggest that there could still be amendments made to the design of this proposal, ensuring that the height restriction of 12 metres is adhered to, especially facing Dunningham Reserve. But I think, or I hope, that the illustrations I've presented explain my point more succinctly than I can in words.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. From my reading of the plans, I think essentially what you've shown is the top floor is removed. I think technically there may still be a slight breach of the 12-metre control if that were the case. But I take it you're not looking for necessarily strict compliance with 12 metres, but rather that one-storey reduction.
Yes, precisely. That's my point. Thank you, Chair.
That's okay. Panel members, do you have any questions of Councillor Nielsen?
No, thank you.
So thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
The next speaker I have is Mr. Frank Friedman. Mr. Friedman, are you there? Mr. Friedman, if you're there, you may be on mute.
Yeah. Sorry?
Can
you hear me now?
We can. So again, I might just remind you about the necessity to declare any political donations, but otherwise proceed with your address.
Yeah, okay. Technically not very good either, but that's what we're talking about. 39 Arcadia Street as viewed from the east and the north. So my main concerns have been, well, firstly, I'd like to say hello to everyone. Firstly, I'm a ratepayer of Randwick City Council, residing in the close proximity to the proposed development of 39 Arcadia Street. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the restoration and maintenance of the heritage listed Bellarmic House is probably needed, and one way of funding That is, one way of funding that is to develop sellable residences on the adjacent land, as they did in the 60s and 70s to the south side of the house. It is hoped that scale of development is now history. My main concerns are consistent with my first knowledge that a new development has been proposed by a developer that probably only has profit, big profit at that, in mind. Concerns that have been forwarded in previous submissions, but to which there's been little response. The proposed structure extends more than the 12-metre height, as the councillor has highlighted. But as far as I'm concerned, the 12-metre height should be from the lowest point of the property, which is the southwest corner. But also, the new proposal would also dwarf the historic building. So why not restrict the new building to not just the 3 stories as suggested, but to the same height as the heritage house as it exists now? So maybe only 2 stories high. The other query I have concerns an explanation to the northern elevation. The brick extension is to be removed. The brick extension to the original house is to be removed, with the idea to expose the original stonework, including the semicircular entrance. Seems to be a fundamental requirement. But then the proposal is to build a new structure with a timber screening to cover up the original sandstone. This is from the northern side, which is that one there. So that's it existing now. And then they want to put in something which is totally ridiculous. They want to put in this sort of pavilion type structure there, which will block the sandstone that they're restoring. Seems a bit strange to me that they go to this effort to open up the heritage stonework and then cover it up again, particularly from the only visible elevation. The other problem is that
your 3 minutes has in fact elapsed, but do you have much more?
Okay, well, I'll go quickly then onto. In October 2022, the Domain magazine of the Sydney Morning Herald had a 2-page article, which to me was highlighting the fact that this development was way ahead of the DA, and they were expecting it to have a DA approval and hoping to attract some funding. Anyway, I'll leave it there then. I'll just say I'll leave you with the thought that the sounds around the streets will no longer be the same. No birds, particularly over the next 2 to 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Panel members, do you have any questions? No. So thank you. The next registered speaker is Mr. Ryan Elliott, who's, I believe, representing the Coogee precinct. Mr. Elliott, are you there?
I am, yes, Chair, and no political donations from me. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. The 33 objections received for this DA reflect the strong community sentiment that this DA should be refused. The executive summary states that the proposed number of stories is consistent with the streetscape, but negates to mention its location immediately on the boundary of Dunningham Reserve and its location in the scenic foreshore protection area. The applicant argues that the height of 10 Major Street and 23 Baden Street support their DA, but neither of these items are heritage items. Really, apartment design guidelines, there's a requirement for the site to have 393 square metres of open communal space, and just 200 are provided on the basis the building residents can use Dunningham Reserve, as if the reserve is a fixal. Privacy is really poor for the new residents, a bit of a fishbowl, and there's poor privacy to and from members of the public in the reserve. The height control of 12 metres could have been complied with. I think the two previous speakers have touched upon this, but the addition of the penthouse results in a 17.4 metre proposal, and instead we're looking at 6 stories, basement to penthouse, rather than a 3 to 4 story building would have complied and been more sympathetic to the remaining heritage item. I want to focus on 2 important points. The heritage assessment dedicates just 2 short paragraphs to Sir James Joynton Smith, and the applicant speaks of demolishing later additions as though they might be from the 1990s. It's these 1914 to 1939 additions that are being demolished. Arcadia Street itself was formerly called Fish Street and gets its name from Sir Joynton Smith, as he was the owner of the Arcadia Hotel in Sydney. He's a remarkable person. He established the nucleus of what would become the Sydney Council power grid. He funded the development of professional rugby league, was president of New South Wales Rugby, founded the Royal South Sydney Hospital, which merged with Prince of Wales. He was awarded a KBE for philanthropy when he turned 39 Arcadia into a hotel for the treatment of shell-shocked soldiers. He also backed Sydney's first radio station located in his Smith's Weekly building. I could go on, but conscious of time. He's a very remarkable character, arguably more so than Charles Moore. And the proposal wipes Sir Joynton Smith's contributions off the site, and the building, for me, loses its connection to Arcadia Street. Had the developer really wanted to enhance the heritage offering at 39 Arcadia, this could have been achieved in other ways and without the addition of an excessive height apartment block, which robs the community of views to the heritage item from Dunningham Reserve and imposes itself on the reserve with a nil setback to the eastern boundary. And that brings me on to the loss of public open space. The open space asset officer is recommended to strategically plant trees along the eastern boundary to assist with privacy issues resulting from the glass apartments being developed on the boundary. And this is somehow morphed into the developer getting a width of approximately 5 to 6 metres of the public reserve along the full length of the site, including the removal of existing low growth vegetation, soil regrading, guarding edging, installation of plants, mulching, erosion control, safety measures. Don't know if that's a fence. How can it be that the public should lose access to such a large and invaluable open public space in Dunningham Reserve, which forms part of the iconic Coogee to Bondi coastal walk, all to offset the lack of setback and insufficient privacy by the development resulting from its design? I note the recommendation. Sorry,
you're well over your time. Do you have much more? I don't wish to cut you off.
This is my final paragraph. So I note the recommendation from council planning assessors for approval, but I'd hope the panel can see that this site is unique in its heritage listing and its location in the scenic foreshore protection area and adjoining Dunningham Reserve. As such, a better standard, if not the minimum standard, should apply. And respectfully, I'd request that you reject this DA so the developer might take an alternate course of action, respect heritage, and not place such a high burden on Dunningham Reserve and the scenic foreshore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Panel members, any questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Elliott, I have a question. Can you hear me? Can you just unpack a little bit more your concern about what you described as the loss of public access to Dunningham Reserve? Can you just clarify what you mean?
Yeah, so I haven't got a slideshow, my apologies, but at present, as you come down the footpath into Reserve, as you come over that crest, it's quite pleasant. It's very low key in that, presents as a single story. You've got the little articulated roofs, and it really offers quite a pleasant insight into, many people refer to that property as the Baden Hotel or Hastings or Ballamac. And it's a draw. It pulls people from the reserve into Arcadia Street to see what is this? Because it contrasts to 23 Baden Street, which is quite a colourful building that was approved in a very colourful period of planning for Randwick Council. And it's obviously a contrast to that. So it sort of, from the reserve, invites people into Arcadia Street to see, you know, what is this remarkable piece of history? And there's a lot there. It's interesting. There's actually a fairly lengthy YouTube video in respect to the Latimer fuel pump that's on the footpath outside the front of the building as well. I didn't really see much reference to that in the heritage study as well. And I think it's interesting that, you know, if just the fuel pump itself can elicit the production of a YouTube video into the heritage of Coogee, it's that we'll lose really, because what will happen instead as you come into the reserve, you know, from Bondi into Coogee, instead of you know, almost a gateway of heritage, what you'll walk into is a glass-fronted, very excessive, well, very high new build residential block right on the reserve as well. Not very appealing.
Thank you.
Any other panel members? Any questions? So thank you, Mr. Elliott, for your submission. We obviously take that and the previous submissions into account. I now have Mr. Daniel Barber registered to speak on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Barber, are you there?
Evening, panel members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. So first, I'll just mention I'm the applicant. I'm on behalf of Central Element. Today, I have the consultant team with me. So virtually, I have Jane Irwin, who's our landscape architect. I have Russell Kingdom, who's our arborist. Tim Greer here, architect. Giovanni, which is our planning consultant. Todd, architect, and development manager Sarah, who's also from Central Element. So if you have any specific questions, you can refer those to the consultant team. Just to give you a bit of background of the project, we've gone through a very lengthy and collaborative process with council and various authorities in this project. So we had a preliminary DA meeting early last year where we had a design panel meeting, and we went through all the different potential, you know, risks and opportunities in the design with council. Once we're in a position where the council were satisfied with the proposal, we lodged a development application in July last year. Since then, we've had another 2 design panel meetings and various referrals with council staff and made many various amendments to the proposal to ensure they're satisfied with it. Council are supportive of our proposal. We fully endorse the recommendation of the design panel and council staff. We agree with their position. I think it's a very well considered project, and it should be noted too, while we're the applicant and the developer, there is residents within the current site moving back into that project, specifically the penthouse. So it's, I would say, you know, it's something where there's residents that have been there for decades of time are coming back. So it's almost them leaving a legacy, I guess, on the site with us. We're working very closely with them. Just one response to make about the height. It is a Part 3, Part 4 height control, and we've been very mindful of complying with that control. Whilst there is a variation to the height standard, a big part of that is the Building Practitioners Act. So the big height now 3.2 metres for every level at a very minimum to comply with the waterproofing requirements. So as you can tell from 12 metres, it's impossible to have a 4-storey building fit within 12 metres with a 3.2 floor height in each level. And then secondly, as you may have seen on site, that there's a significant unnatural fall of the land where it's purposely excavated at the front where it drops by 3 metres. So when we proposed the proposal to the design panel, they actually recommended that we should relate to the natural ground level and align with the park level, which sits around 12 metres, rather than follow the artificial excavated level. So we purposely followed the design panel's advice and designed the building to fit within that natural seascape. So, and the number of stories control. And there's also a control for the uppermost level that it has to sit 60% within the floor plate level below. We're fully complying with that control. So for our consideration, we've effectively designed the building to be compliant with the DCP and the very minimum height we can provide whilst achieving compliance with the Design Practitioners Act. And then I have the rest of the to address any comments from the panel.
Thank you. Could I ask you firstly just to confirm that whether or not there's been any political donations?
No. No political donations.
Thank you. Panel members, any questions?
Yeah, I might kick off. Thank you, Mr. Barber. I have some questions about the way that the Ballamac House is being treated as part of this development. Should I put them to Mr. Greer or?
Yeah,
I think put the question, they can decide who
Okay.
is best to answer.
Yep.
Okay, yep. Look, in the heritage impact assessment, the additions to the original 1860s house have occurred over time, of course, and they're rated as having different levels of significance, and the removal, at least some of those, is generally good conservation practice if they're detracting from the significance of the more significant part of the building. However, in removing the section, the addition, the early addition to the front, the northern elevation of Ballamac House, and then, which is rated as moderate significance, and then replacing that with a new addition, which will be similarly, I suppose, intrusive in the sense of the impact it would have on limiting views of the earlier, more significant house. That addition does seem to not fit with the overall philosophy, I suppose, or reinstating, if you like, for want of a better word, the significance of Ballamac House. How do you respond to that?
Well, Tim Greer speaking. Mr. Romy, what we were looking to, I guess when we did our first heritage studies of the house, which was quite an extensive investigation, we realised that the significance of Ballamac House was its relationship to Coogee Beach, very much its space to the south, the beach and the west, and we were very keen to keep that as open space. Then when we looked at the later additions to Fisk Street or Arcadia Road, we really felt that that addition had very much obscured the original Ballamac House. And yes, we have taken a building away and we've put one back, but you'll notice that it's much lower than the building that we've removed. It's actually separated off the original house. Frank, we sat very politely while you spoke. I think you could have the decency to do the same to us. Thank you. Are we able to screen that? Sorry, we're getting a lot of hand gestures at this end. So what that new building does is it's separated away from Ballamac House, and you can see from the ends and actually from the street, you'll notice that the building is lower so that you see the curved apse, which was the original staircase, the gutter line and the roof. That is visible from the street and you see it from the ends. And we've done a great deal of modelling. We put lots of different forms there. We looked at them in different ways so that we could express the original building. You also note where the main front door to the building is that comes around the side, and as you walk up that entrance, that whole corner will be expressed. The other thing that we did have to manage on the site, which is difficult, is car parking. And by putting a new building there, we're able to bring the car park driveway down at a lower level, so that's completely concealed. And what that allowed us to do was to keep the landscape to the west and to the south, which is a significant area for planting, so that we could re-establish the original curtilage of Ballamac House. And of course, with historic houses, the gardens were often as important as the house, and those two sides gave us that opportunity to do so, which been beautifully developed by Jane Irwin, landscape architect. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I'm happy to go on to more detail, but that's sort of the, I guess, the principles, which are one is around, everything's obviously interconnected. So it's about maintaining the significant landscape curtilage. It's about expressing Ballamac House to the street more clearly than it is now, because the Fisk wing totally obscures the building. And yes, we went into the history of that occupant and their construction work, very set out in detail in the TZG Heritage by Julie McKenzie, the survey that we prepared. Getting a visual recognition of Ballamac from the street, and then having an entrance which, as you walk into the building, we can express the components of the development.
Thank you.
Panel members, any further questions?
Yeah. Could I just ask you to respond, or one of your team to respond to the issue raised by Ryan, I think, with regards to the perceived impacts on the reserve, that the encroachment, as it were, of the landscaping that's being proposed, the 5 to 6 metres. What's the reasoning behind the landscaping? And if you didn't have that, what would be the implications for you?
I think the first thing to acknowledge is that there's a zero lot alignment on the property today. There's a house that sits right on the edge of the balcony, and the new building is set back. The area that was referred to landscaping, that is currently planted at the moment, and the planting is struggling, and it was something that came out of conversation with council, with Jane Irwin. Was there a possibility that this development could improve the quality of the public domain, the reserve? And Central Element, as the applicant, were happy to assist in the improvement of that landscape, albeit on public land, but funded by the development.
Do you want me to?
Just picking up the second part though, what would be the impact if that were not provided?
The planting, it could just be grassed. It would be, it would have no impact on the development. The reserve, instead of having a landscaping at its edge, would have grass, because the path actually bends well into the middle of the reserve from that corner, from the end of Arcadia Street. As you would have seen this morning, you come off the end of it and the path takes you down and around to Coogee. There would be no change there, and the landscape would just become turf. It would have very little bearing on the development. But the actual, I have to make the point that the proposal came out of discussion with council. It was a suggestion, and it was picked up by the applicant. It wasn't actually proposed by the applicant as a part of the development.
So you don't rely upon that to provide privacy for occupants of the lower apartments? No,
there's a fence that steps down the hill. That is a reconstruction of the fence that's currently there at the moment. It's a very interesting fence because the stone actually comes from Manly, from a demolished building in Manly.
Thank you. Any further?
Yeah, could I just ask another question? Just regarding the clause 4.6 variation to the height, maybe this is one for your planner. The environmental planning grounds to justify the height breach. Could you just run us by those, given the views expressed by the councillor and the other objector in terms of why couldn't it be a compliant building?
Sure, Heather. Giovanni Cirillo speaking. I prepared the clause 4.6 statement. As you know, there are a number of prongs in preparing a clause 4.6 statement, but principally the basis for council and indeed the panel to be able to grant a variation relies upon the ability to satisfy the zone objectives, satisfy the height objectives contained in the LEP, and but going beyond that, and we've demonstrated that in writing, and you have it before you, what I wrote. It's also important to understand the natural slope of the land and the fact that the building actually works in with the slope of the land, but notwithstanding that, because of the way the height, the axonometric expression of the building works with the slope of the land, there is unfortunately a numeric variation to the standard. Now, when that occurs, you're also compelled to look at the physical impacts, the manifestations of that variance, and particularly looking at the building in its context. Now, when you compare the building with its immediate context, you'll see, and indeed there are in the report, there are photo montages that clearly show this building sits well lower than the buildings that sits on its shoulders immediately to either side. So we believe that, bearing in mind both the slope of the land and its immediate context, it's actually quite an appropriate response. And by removing an additional level, what that does is does not provide any improvement in solar access. It does not provide any improvement in view. It arguably provides a worse contextual response to the buildings on either side. And more importantly, what it does is it creates pressure on the remainder of the curtilage to actually put that floor space, which is encompassed in the floor space ratio, elsewhere. So the variance to the height, in fact, provides, if you like, a looser fit, or at least a better curtilage of the building insofar as its relationship with Ballamac is concerned. So we believe it strikes a very important balance between the need to provide space around Ballamac, to provide a building that responds to its topography, and thirdly, and most importantly, provides a contextually appropriate solution, bearing in mind the height of the buildings that are substantially larger than ours on either side.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Oh, yeah, the tallow wood tree. When we were out on site, we saw that we saw the Canary Island palm, and we understand that's now to be retained. The tallow wood tree looked quite healthy. We noticed there'd been some lifting of the pavement and so on, but presumably that would all be paved there anyway. What's the reasoning behind, or the reason why that has to be removed?
Do you want me to speak to that?
Yep.
Who are you?
Sorry, I'm Jane Owen. I'm the landscape architect for the project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Really the reason that you can see in that space there, which is now paved, we've proposed a garden, and it's quite an open garden, except for the addition of some planting at the back and some trees, really to recognise that this is the front of the building, and to keep some open space in the front of the building as it is now and as it always has been, I think. So the reason for the removal of the tallow tree was just because it's in poor condition. If you look up into the canopy, you can see that the top of it gets burnt off all the time by the salt, and that's something that you expect in a situation like this. And so the idea of removing it was to replace it with two more suitable eucalyptus trees, which is the Eucalyptus botryoides, which we would expect to be growing in this situation much closer to the edge of the ocean. So although one would be removed, two would be replaced.
Just in relation to the same tree, was there any issue regarding the tree and the actual Ballamac house itself? Was there any that part of the reasoning, or?
Maybe the arborist can answer that, Ross?
Don't have confirmation that they're online, but if you read through the agricultural impact assessment report, it outlines it as tree 3. Within that report, it says that it's in poor health and there's extensive damage being caused to the existing heritage structure.
That damage is lifting the paving in that courtyard area, I take it, or is it more than that?
It's more than that. It's the structure, like the root structure is growing out and it's hitting that actual edge of the house there.
Yeah, sorry, Todd Sullivan from TZG here. The lower basement wall, the external wall on the western side, is actually been damaged to such an extent that it will need to be rebuilt in the same position. So it's encroaching further and further east towards the foundations of the heritage building.
Okay. panel members, any further questions? I think the answer is no.
No.
So, I think that's all. Do panel members have any questions for council officers in relation to this matter at this time? No? All right, thank you. That we've now heard from all of the registered speakers, and I thank you all for your assistance. In accordance with the panel guidelines, the public meeting will now be closed, and we'll move to a closed meeting to deliberate and vote on this matter and several other matters we're dealing with in that later meeting. The outcome from voting and determination will be made available through the council's website, either late tonight or tomorrow. A recording of the public meeting, as I've mentioned before,